You're listening to Federal Prison Authority presents Around the Block with Bruce Cameron and Susan Giddings, only on LA Talk Radio.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Federal Prison Authority presents Around the Block with myself, Bruce Cameron, and Dr. Susan Giddings. Welcome to our first show.
Welcome, everyone.
All right, man. We're so pleased to be here, folks. We can't wait to offer you just so much to cover. Every show, lots going on, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, primarily focused on the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Right? We may drift into other crime topics or federal crime, but we'll do that. But also mainly in the context of what's happening in the Federal Bureau of Prisons right now, and maybe some of the management of the population, and we'll go into those things. But before we get into that, I brought a couple little show and tell things. I'm so happy. I started my career in 1990 at this place here. I know you can't see it, but it's FCI Butner. And Butner at the time was a place where all the forensic studies went for psychiatric studies and those things. For those who remember koozies from the 80s, well, look at that. How about that? Put your cold beverage in there, employees club special. And then right around the time Susan and I, we met, but right around this time, she was down the street at Seymour Johnson. And here's the activation thing for Butner Camp in 1991. So, and that's kind of where my career began in psychology services, doing the psych evals. And then I opened the first RDAP program. I also opened the first sex offender unit. So, wow, what a time at the end of that war on drugs period to get, to join the Bureau and and get knee deep into psychology services programming, which continues to this day. And we'll talk about the importance, right, of psychology services. So, Susan, welcome.
Welcome. So yeah. I had a little bit different path than you did. Started out as a correctional officer at Seymour Johnson, was right out of grad school. Kind of funny story, when you were at Butner and the in that unit with the forensic cases, I was attending University of South Carolina and attended a government jobs career fair, and representatives from Butner were there. And I, as a young grad student, was like, I don't know if I want to work at a facility, a mental health prison. And so went back to my career services office, did a little investigation on the Bureau of Prisons and what they had to offer, and decided I'd take a little bit different path. And I started at Seymour Johnson. They were in the process of, they had a kind of a mini activation moving into the military barracks while the final prison was being built. And I joined them, and they were still in the barracks as an officer. And the funny story is, when I ended up working my way back to Carswell, where you and I reconnected again after both of us left Seymour Johnson, is eventually I ended up in the women's mental health unit. So I attempted to avoid that, and my career in the early 90s, mid 90s brought me back.
Both at Carswell. We were both at Carswell for 6 years. I was there for 6 years. Were you there for 6 years?
I was there a year longer. I got there in summer of 94, and I left summer of 2001, right before 9/11.
Right, I left in 2000. Well, interesting, and so that's just the beauty of Susan and I, because I was really kind of steeped in the programs aspect, and then later on in the career, which we'll get to later, became an RRM staff and residential reentry, placing people in halfway houses and then getting them the services that they needed for transitional services and sex offender treatment, mental health treatment, and those things. So, and so this has just been a good complement to each other's skill sets. I can't tell you, and again, for those of you that are looking at this, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of you looking at this that are members of our Facebook page. Thanks for joining the First Step Back Facebook page. I really appreciate that. But I'm going to tell you, man, the BOP is complex, and everybody's figuring that out now, right? with the button pushes and calculations and second chance days and first step days and projected release dates and conditional dates and all this stuff, man. And it's a lot to learn, and it was a lot to learn even when we were there. You know, I mean, it's just a big. It's like its own planet, you know, and I know a lot of you know that, and some of you are frustrated with that. We understand that, and that's why we do this, is because we understand your frustration with the government. And
well, and later in my career, where you went out to the community, I stayed and then eventually moved up into the regional and
yes.
central office level and got to see the agency at kind of a higher altitude, so to speak, and starting to look at the impact of legislation as it's rolling out, and OIG and GAO and a few other letters that are thrown in. But it's you don't realize. I know I didn't, as a case manager or case manager coordinator in the institution, just the moving parts that are involved. And I can remember sitting in my little office in Lee County, Virginia, and getting some email from someone in region or someone in central office, and they needed something like now, like drop everything, and they needed information by the end of the day or first thing in the morning. And I'm thinking, like, do you not realize what I have going on? I had no idea the pace of DC. And I didn't get there until I was almost 30 years, 28 years in the agency, 29, when I moved to DC. And it is just complex as an understatement.
Yeah, and it is. So you're right. I was in the regional office there in the residential reentry section, looking at the halfway house and home confinement stuff. We also did the whole contract and procurements and those things. So I had to kind of put a businessman's hat on, or businesswoman, whatever business hat on to procure these contracts under the judicial acquisition regulations and the FAR. Just a pleasure to do it, because I understand. And, we're going to talk about it. BOP is cash strapped right now. And I mean, cash strapped. All right. I mean, strapped beyond strapped. I mean, actually probably at 2020, we're in 2025, 2023 levels. This is interesting, right? Because the First Step Act came about in 2018, and we're only where we are at nearly 7 years later. Think about that. So people are saying, oh, this is going to change and that's going to change and whatever. We've only had that much change in the 7 years that the First Step Act has been into existence. And so what I'm telling you folks is be patient. It's kind of slow because, and Susan does a real good job of telling our callers, our prospective clients, why it takes so long and the steps with Congress and laws and unions and all this other stuff. And Susan was knee deep in that. I mean, and so she knows all that stuff because she was in Washington, D.C., a high-ranking official in Washington, D.C., which is fantastic because she understands how this stuff happens. I was just at the regional level I don't want to say getting stuff done, but just being more of a worker, I mean, sure, I understood regional stuff and I understood some of that stuff, but the only OIG people came in were investigating dirty staff or halfway house staff. So I wasn't, I did some internal affairs work stuff at the end, but they make you do that when they know you don't want to, nobody cares about you when you're about ready to retire. Anyway, so Susan, talk some about your DC experience and how that has absolutely come in clutch with our service.
Right. So, we see it all the time on our Facebook group. Oh, is there going to be a change with 924C? And what about 922G? And what's this rumor going on about they're going to move all the campers out to home confinement?
Well, they're going to close all the camps. Yeah,
we're going to close all the camps and move them out to home confinement. Yeah. Even if they were seriously going to consider that, and I'm going to put a really big air quotes around seriously considering that. Okay. I don't see that happening. The way the Bureau is able to move people to home confinement is under specific authorities. And right now there are 2 authorities to move individuals out to home confinement. Under CARES Act, they had a third one, gave the Bureau that flexibility. As people remember, COVID very much when you're living in common areas. So you saw issues in nursing homes and in hospitals. We saw them in prison. When you have folks living in an open community environment, disease spreads. That is just the nature of living in proximity to folks and not having your own room. But under that, the Congress passed the CARES Act, gave the Bureau that authority. That lasted into 2003 or 23, I'm sorry. But once that went away, we were back to Second Chance Act and First Step Act. And those two laws are very different. Bruce and I have had several conversations how those two laws kind of compete with each other. And in Congress, kind of not thinking about the implication for the Second Chance Act, because of course it was passed back in 2007, 2008, not thinking about that impact. Kind of created a lot of problems and challenges for folks in custody coming out, and they're thinking they're going to get all this halfway house time because they're eligible for up to 12 months. And
right. So let's jump right in. And I know you're not going to want to do that, but you know me, I'm pretty impulsive. But let's jump in there. We had a caller today that had a short sentence. We'll say a short sentence in our world is around a year or less than a year or a little more than a year.
Short.
Okay. So with all due respect, we're sorry that the person has to go into custody. However, that's a short sentence. Now, that said, right, because of that, the length of that sentence, all their time the First Step Act time goes toward the early release, and the halfway house will only be Second Chance Act if that's going to be available. Susan, I'll let you go ahead and take that one. Take that.
So anytime there's a sentence, an individual may be getting jail credit if they were in custody prior to sentencing. They may be eligible for good conduct time. The person we were talking to this morning had a 10-month sentence. Guess what? 0 days of good conduct time. So good conduct time requires a minimum of that 12 months plus 1 day. Now, once you get past those hurdles and you get to the Bureau of Prisons, to earn those time credits toward early release, you have to have supervised release, because again, the way Congress wrote the law, they didn't say early release, like the RDAP program. RDAP program is 12 months off your sentence if you're eligible, or up to 12 months.
It can be 1 day. It can be 3.
Up to 12 months, but it's an early release. What does that mean? That means whether you have supervision to follow or not, is this a first sentence? Is this a supervised release violation? None of those issues come into play. In contrast, the First Step Act specifically says the Bureau can apply time credits, the director, up to 12 months to transfer to supervised release. So therefore, that individual that maybe has a violation term and no supervision to follow, all of their credit, none of it goes toward early release. All of it goes toward pre-release placement. But the person that does have the supervised release, their time is going all toward early release. They may or may not get halfway house time. Their only halfway house and home confinement is under the Second Chance Act. And there's quite a bit of discretion in that to include things like bed space, equipment in terms of home confinement, staffing at the halfway house, budget.
But my earned credit sheet says, ma'am, with all due respect, that I earned 300 and whatever 1,000 million days.
And how many times do we say to people, look at the paragraph right before all those dates? In big bold print, it says it's not guaranteed. It's subject to the 5-factor review. And the 5-factor review includes things like bed space. It includes those community resources. It includes whether or not the Bureau has the funding to pay a halfway house for that bed. The acting director testified last week before the Appropriations Committee, talked a lot about some of the budget issues, didn't even touch on halfway house, but it was rough. It was very clear.
I do want to say, I do want to say one thing, and we said it this morning, and I think people need to hear this. People say, oh, well, just send them all to a halfway house. You know, it's more expensive to put an offender in a halfway house and leave them, let's say, at a camp. It's more expensive.
And
It's more
depending on
expensive to go to the community. Yeah.
what community, because halfway house rates are based on the area, and a mandate rate in Chicago is going to be a whole lot different than a mandate rate in Waco, Texas.
Right.
So in some cases, staying in a low security facility is less money per day than to go to halfway house. And that's kind of a crazy thing to get your head wrapped around. Is it is not a cheap proposition for halfway house. Home confinement is less expensive. It is the least expensive option in terms of community placement, but that is still contract driven. That is still equipment driven. That's will the local probation office work with releasing probation pre-release placement releases for federal location monitoring or not? Home confinement is just a kind of an overarching umbrella of home-based releases. Maybe an ankle bracelet, maybe federal location monitoring, could be a cell phone. You know, any number of things.
Right.
Of course,
And
back
again,
in the day, you had to have that landline so they could call you.
Yeah, the old school landline. And you know, and again, there's all these different release dates, right? The good conduct time release date, the FSA conditional release date, and there's some called the home confinement eligibility date. And that date changes as the person's, particularly if they're earning FSA credits, that date kind of changes with them. However, that date is based on different things.
Right.
So Susan, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So, like when we're talking to folks, we like to explain, if you think about that old-fashioned doctor scale, right? And you stand on it, and you got the little bar and you got the little weight that moves across. If you think of that block as home confinement time, it doesn't change. What happens is, as credits applied and the release date changes, that block of time changes. So therefore, the home confinement eligibility date changes. So then everyone gets excited, but my conditional release date is whatever. And the answer is, and that includes both earned and unearned credit. And your home confinement eligibility date is attached to only the earned credit, because unearned credit hasn't happened.
Hasn't been earned. Yeah.
Has not been earned.
I don't know if you remember a few months ago, there was this whole thing about front loading this, loading that. And there's a difference between having a projected date that's in the, that projected date's, if you will, front loaded, but it's not implemented. It's not delivered. Right. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing like with the RDAP program in 3621E. The person gets a conditional date, and then once they finish the program and they get a halfway house bed, which has to be at least 120 days, could be more, but it has to be at least, then they get what's called the 3621E release date. But it's still just a projected date, because you could go through all of your halfway house time, get a dirty UA at the end of it, and it all disappears.
All goes away. It possibly could.
It's not a release date until it's a release date.
Right.
So you get there.
But it's good to know these things, but you have to take them in stride and just understand what they really are. They're certainly not guarantees, but they are projections. They're projections based on this, that, or the other. So you can go to a financial planner and they can say, well, we have this model and we're going to, your entire retirement investments, and they can kind of sort of use some sort of a regression equation to show some sort of a future projection. Has it happened yet? No. Could the market turn south? Absolutely. I mean, the market can turn north, you never know, but it is just a projection. So you can get an idea for planning, release planning, and those things. And so, but
and that's what all of those conditional calculators are for, is to give everybody. And when I say everybody, I really do mean everybody. It's the case manager that's got to figure out, like, when am I getting this paperwork done? When's this paperwork due? How much time do I need to get it through the process? Because there's about 6 people that put their hands on it before it even leaves the institution, to get to the residential reentry folks, to get a placement date. Residential reentry are using those conditional dates to forecast, are they going to have bed space? Where are they at? They're using that to forecast budget projections 2, 3, and 4 years out. So it's not just for the incarcerated population. Everybody is using this data. And, at least in the near term, the numbers aren't great.
Right. And we wish that there was money. We wish that we weren't in a continuing resolution, or we wish that we were under a nice budget cycle that had funding. For those of you who haven't seen that YouTube video, they're talking about cutting on one hand, and then giving the BOP millions and millions of dollars for housing detainees, right? I mean, as if it was nothing. You're like, oh, what are you going to do about, could we have artificial intelligence run these joints and have no staff can we give you $200 million to build an immigration prison? Like, what? You know what I mean? So it's just really, really interesting to see how each member of Congress had their own conception of stuff. And so that acting director, I thought she did a pretty good job. It's a hot place to be, man. It's a hot seat to be in, and it's just a lot of pressure, I know. And then plus, she's just kind of in a spot, right, in between directors.
But she brought out a really good point, and a lot of folks don't, unless you're hip deep like we are in it when we were working, you don't really think about the budget cycle and what do continuing resolutions mean. She made a statement about the continuing resolution from last year. And when you're in a continuing resolution, you're just in a holding pattern. So you have a continuing. So in this case, 2024, fiscal year 2024, which started in October of 2023, was actually in a CR the entire time, and was based on FY23, which started in October of 2022. So that tells you kind of like where, they're trying to operate in February of 2024 with money, with a plan that was from October.
Immediate post-COVID money type stuff.
Absolutely. And then, and she talked about the things that the agency has absorbed. The agency can continue free phone calls for a long time after they stop getting the money for it.
Talk about the phone calls and based on earned, right? Based the phone minutes, the free minutes.
Oh, the free minutes. So under the FSA law, it allowed for additional incentives other than time credits. And nobody really talked about them because everyone was focused on time credits. And the big one, next big one, the free phone minutes, was already being kind of covered with pandemic money. So, but under the law, for participation and completion of evidence-based recidivism reducing programs, individuals can get these other incentives. So starting in last month in January, as folks know, there was some changes with regard to phone minutes, the cost of minutes. Phone minutes are now like 6 cents. They were like 12 cents. So that was going into effect in January. So the Bureau kind of timed the new FSA benefit with regard to phone time with that change so that it all kind of went into effect at the same time. So an individual has to have a need and has to be either participating, completed within the last month, or on a wait list for one of the EBVRs. So you can be doing a whole lot of programming that maybe are productive activities, maybe they're non-FSA programming. Those aren't what gets you the free minutes. It's only those evidence-based recidivism reducing programs. So if you're involved in one of those, on a wait list for one of those, or completed it within the last month, then you're getting those free minutes. Those free minutes validate every month on your normal validation cycle. So you may be getting free minutes this month, but you completed the program last month, so it carried over, but then you haven't started anything. And now next month, you're like, where are my free minutes? It's
Right.
all about what have you done for me lately? Flashing back to the 80s. It's about what have you done lately? So if you're
Yeah.
not staying engaged, it's not there.
Right. Right. Speaking of what have you done for me lately, you know, these surveys for First Step Acts, when somebody comes in, the surveys are very, very crucial. And I notice that sometimes people, for whatever reason, might not have completed a survey from psychology or whatever, and they get in this kind of talk a little bit about how dreadfully important that is not to miss those surveys, particularly when you first come in.
Sure. So the surveys are part of the needs assessment. So Congress, in passing the FSA, they said, okay, Bureau, you're going to create these assessments, and you're going to assess folks for these criminogenic needs. And then you're going to assign programming. And we're not just going to throw programming at somebody. We're all just not going to just go, well, I want to take this or I want to take that. Like, they want there to be that linkage between a need and a program. So the needs assessments, there's 13 of them. Some of them are a record review, and staff kind of handle it exclusively. Some of it involves some joint activity between the individual and the staff member. For instance, the dyslexia, if you go through the initial dyslexia screening and you see more dyslexia testing, you have to agree to the test. You know, like, they're not going to tie you down and make you do it. So you have to agree to that. And then there's this other group, and there's 4 of them, and they are a self-assessment. They're available through the computer system. Now, when they first rolled out, the faster you got them done, the faster you could start earning programming days. And if you randomly missed one and it kind of lingered for a while, well, those were days, whether it was 1 or 2 or 7 or 8 or 3 weeks, that you missed. In 2024, Bureau kind of internally made a decision and said, you know what, you have 28 days. You have to be team within 28 days. You have 28 days to get them done. And as long as you get them done within 28 days, well, the Bureau will then consider them complete to the day you walk in the door. So whether you completed it day 2 or day 20, you're getting credit to you did what you needed to do as soon as you got in. But if you go to day 29, you lose all of those days. And when I say lose, I mean, I'm not talking about time credits. I'm talking about those programming days, because you don't earn time credit directly. Time credit is based on programming days. So if you don't complete an assessment until day 29, 30, 40, those are days that are not available to you. You were opted out, and there is no getting them back. When they're gone, they're gone. It's not like losing time credits through getting sanctioned, right? Those, you can go through a process and request restoration. These are program days.
If the person was, I don't want to say delinquent, but hadn't filled that out, on their next team, shouldn't their case manager say, hey, I notice, right?
It will be part of their team process, but team only happens every 3 or 6 months.
I know.
Do you really want to, wait? We had a client that one of the ones that required a joint activity got missed. It was a piece of paper that was missed at intake. And we caught it, and we reached out to the family and said, tell him, go over to psychology. Should somebody have caught that piece of paper? Yeah. Yeah. But the self-assessments is a different thing. This was not a self-assessment. And my opinion is that should have been caught. But the self-assessments, do you want to wait 3 months to find out?
Yeah.
So.
No, you don't. Yeah. So that's real crucial. I know with our clients, we try to do a very thorough orientation. If we're retained before they self-surrender or report to prison, we go through a very thorough orientation on the surveys, on doing what you need to do to become First Step Act in, qualifying immediately and able to earn these earn these credits from just as soon as you can,
Right.
and seamlessly without a break in service. So
what usually happens when somebody isn't getting credit and they haven't finished it, they find out because everyone's talking about credit's been posted and they're like, well, I haven't.
Right.
What
my date didn't advance.
Change. What happened? And that's and by then those days are gone.
Yeah, it could easily be 60 days because you got there a minute, went through one button push cycle, maybe not, I was carried over or not. The next cycle, nothing happens. I should be 20 days off my sentence, and here we are, dead in the water.
Yeah,
not dead in the water, but
that's why we've talked about when we're working with pre-sentence clients, talking about that voluntary surrender date and when do you voluntarily surrender, and requesting the right date. It makes a difference for catching things earlier, for getting on the right cycle, for maximizing your credits.
Okay, which brings us to another thing. Man, I Googled my First Step Act calculator on Google now, and I can put this and that in, and it tells me that I'm going to get out on such and such a day. Why is that incorrect? Because of
the way the calculator works. So all of those calculators work on exact 30-day increments.
Right.
And the Bureau does not update individuals every single day. So it's not when the person hits 30 days. It is when the calculator runs, do you have 30 days? And so, but I've even seen a couple of those calculators have some errors beyond that. Some good conduct time calculations that come out wrong and things like that. So I know everybody's trying to come up with a formula. And you and I, we do rough calculations kind of in our head, and then sit down and do the math.
But even still, you and I know that the Bureau may not even run the next damn button. I mean, just saying.
Things happen.
April the 15th. It's not going to happen. If it's April, we're in March now, everybody here in 2025 for reference. But if it doesn't run until April 7th, you know what I mean? That has a drastic impact on these folks' dates.
If they're rolling out new code, if they make a change and say they do a mid-month run, and they still do one at the end of the month, well, if you captured your 30 days here, then 2 weeks later, you're not going to have 30 more days. Or depending on when you voluntarily surrender and when things get done. And,
Is this going to get better, ladies and gentlemen? Absolutely. Is it going to be tomorrow? Probably not.
Probably not.
Here we are 7 years into the implementation, and this is where we're at.
And part of it has to
getting better, but it just shows you.
Absolutely. And part of it has to do with the Bureau prioritized the important stuff.
Yeah.
Even the release date calculator one, like it wasn't important initially to try to figure out what might happen in the future if everything goes as planned, when they needed to get folks' release dates calculated, and I'll hear people say, "Oh, it's not. The calculator is working." The calculator has been working.
It does work, yes.
When they rolled out new code with the conditional calculator, because they rolled out the conditional calculator for release over a year ago now, 18 months ago, were there some hiccups in that in the first week it was rolled out? Sure.
Don't misconstrue what I'm saying, folks. It's just the variability of the application. The variability. It works, but it doesn't happen like a clock, right? Which I think a lot of people think it should, and it probably should, but it doesn't right now. And so it's just that variability that people kind of get lost in that lack of consistency.
Right.
But it's going to get
doesn't run. Each person doesn't have their own. It's a system. It's not. It doesn't care that this person came in on the 7th and got their stuff done right away, but then they went out on a medical trip and they got admitted and they were out for 3 days. It's a system thing. So each month, each time that calculator runs, it's running through the whole population and it's checking everybody and where you are on that day. You know, did they touch it on Saturday? Did they touch your case on Sunday? Might make a difference.
Right. And so we've had clients before where we were able to do that math and say, okay, you're probably going to be an immediate release on X date and kind of get ready. And we kind of emailed some folks to get ready, because if you look on that moment, well, I don't see them as an immediate release. Like, well, you know, they're going to be, and you don't want to get, you know, and every BOP staff member doesn't want to get behind the 8 ball of a late release. You don't want that. You know, you don't want to be shagging balls, busting, you know, for an immediate release either. You want to be prepared and have these people go out through R&D, process out in a timely fashion.
The last thing you want to do is walk in on Monday morning and the calculator ran over the weekend and you've got 3 immediate releases. That's a bad Monday.
And people are mad because I would have gotten out 7 days ago, you know, but the button didn't get pushed until now. And so now I've had to languish in prison for 7 days and everybody's upset.
And on top of that, you also have the situation, and I'll kind of speak for the unit secretaries that are in those housing units that are doing that release paperwork. They're generating paperwork sometimes 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead of time. I've seen some secretaries that, you know, were running 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time because they were that good and they were on the ball. This is something, the first step back with these changing dates is something that's new, like historically. That's like way, way, way different than anything's been done. So you get someone who's got a conditional release date, you know, their current release date is the end of next week. Their conditional release date was this past week, and then the calculator runs and now they're releasing on Monday. And this secretary has done the paperwork 2 times and now they're doing it a 3rd time.
Right, because the dates keep changing.
So the agency is working on fine-tuning and kind of tightening that up. But as long as the way the law is written, you know, if you flash way back to when the Bureau first started this kind of, how are we going to implement this, right? The law arrives on our desk like a Christmas present, as I like to say. And it looked really fun. And, you know, and for those of us who are really old to remember Meritorious Good Time, we were like, yeah, this is a great idea, incentivizing program participation. And then you get into it. So initially, the agency was only going to award time credit up until you hit 365 days or 18 months from release. And then everything else was going to apply to halfway house. Well, the outside stakeholders and through that rules process where people get to write in their feelings, it was no, we want to get out to early, you know. So the Bureau changed and because of course it was passed under one administration and implemented under another, and the 2 different administrations felt differently. So that was changed. And the new strategy of this earning up and through release creates the current situation we're in. Personally, had we kept it the other way, yes, some folks with shorter sentences would not be getting an earlier release, but they would be guaranteed home confinement placement. Now they're not. Now they get that credit and they may or may not get halfway house.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've seen place in Florida, people getting 1 day of halfway house, people in Mid-Atlantic region getting nothing, qualifying for a lot. I mean, it's just really tough out there right now. And if funding gets worse, you know, and these numbers go up, it's just a synergistic effect of, you know, we may see a time where these second SCA days, Second Chance Act days might not even be
at all
relevant. We'll see what happens with that.
And because of the difference in the law, they're prioritizing, and they have to prioritize FSA placements.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
When you consider probably 65% of the population either because of their statute that they're convicted under, or because they're medium or high risk, don't even get to apply the credit. So there's only about 45% of the folks that get to apply the credit to start with. And then if we eliminate those individuals with really short sentences that are earning less than 365,
Right.
they are prioritizing a very small percent of a minority of the population that have those 400, 500, 600, 700 days and more of placement toward halfway house. They're getting prioritized because the law says the Bureau has to prioritize them.
Right. And, you know, we had, luckily before all this happened, we had a client that they were brothers and they got a year halfway house. I don't know if you remember that, Susan, but they got a year halfway. And their sentence was like not much over a year, right? I mean, their sentence was
18, 21. It was a short
sentence. Yeah. And so, right. And so these are the stories, but these are the stories that you're hearing on the compound. Well, I know these dudes and they did all this and that and the other, but that was it's not an apples to apples comparison. I mean, the culture has changed, man. I mean, what's going on with the budget and bed space has changed from even a year and a half ago or a year ago.
It's changed just in the last few months. Remember, the conditional placement calculator rolled out mid-October. And all of a sudden, all of these folks that they had dates out here in the future somewhere were right here. And case managers were trying to identify cases and go back to the regions and say, hey, I know you gave me a date, but I need you to move it by 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. And so again, what we started seeing late in the fall, it just started before Christmas, but it's getting worse by the day as they're trying to get these FSA guys and they get priority. Yeah.
And because that's what the law is about. So, you know, folks, it's really interesting, right? So things are, you know, what I tell you is it's a case by case basis. Don't look at the guy in the bunk next to you or the gal in the same row. Because you don't know about their situation, right? Are they releasing to the same zip code? There are co-defendants involved. I mean, just so many different things, right? That in these rumor mills, you know, I mean, I get it. You know, you're doing time and you got plenty of time to strategize and figure stuff out. But some of that stuff is going to be hearsay, you know? So, and that's why we do our very best to be in touch with BOP officials weekly, if not more than weekly, to hear it from the horse's mouth, not some rumor this or some rumor. There's even rumors among prison consultants, for God's sakes. We don't do that. I mean, I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. And so we have, you know, we're blessed that we can talk to folks readily and see what's really, you know, what happened in that meeting or what's going on.
Right.
And we can kind of base our tone and our delivery to what we've been told. And sometimes it makes, you know, me particularly not a popular guy because my delivery is a little bit rough and gruff sometimes. If you call me before the 10th cup of coffee, you know, but you know, but seriously, so yeah, but that's, you know, but we're here and you know, this is a passion for us. You know what I mean? Yeah, sure, we do this, but this is what we've done. Our lives, our adult lives, has been predicated on these policies, these procedures. Working with inmates, reintegrating them into society. I mean, that has been our life's work, and to be able to continue that, and while we're retired, you know what I mean, semi-retired, and we're still working, right? But we work for ourselves. But you know, it's a pleasure and it's an honor for us to do that and you know, serve our clients. We don't take that for granted, and we know there's a lot of choices out there to make or whatever, but. But yeah, so
when we started talking about this new show and what we were going to call it and the idea of Around the Block, you know, Bruce and I, between the two of us, have over 60 years experience. That makes us old. And we've seen different cycles, and we've seen the kind of the ebb and flow of the Bureau and the politics and the different policies. And I used to jokingly say, I didn't care who was president. I watch every State of the Union address, because if the president's talking about it in the evening, we're talking about it the next day. And we've seen those changes, but the kind of around the block, we also, we understand it's about prison. It's about reentry, and those are two, they're different and they're connected, and there's a lot of challenges with reentry, and we'll talk about those kinds of things too.
Right, and we've had some penitentiary clients that got into some situations that we helped them navigate through their situation. We've had clients in mediums in particular situations that we help them navigate through their situations. We've had people navigate through transfers from mediums to lows. So we do service, the whole shebang from penitentiary to community custody. But, I think just a lot of the emphasis is on these release procedures and the First Step Act.
Right. And we do a lot of education. A lot of our time is spent talking to family members and helping them understand the process, navigating a system as large as the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It is sometimes difficult when you're on the inside as a staff member trying to figure things out. So for family members on the outside trying to figure out who to talk to, explain this, I'm reading this and it doesn't make sense, I don't understand. And we spend a lot of time kind of with that education component. As a case manager, I very much was involved in educating the guys and gals on my caseload, so they understood their custody classification. They understood I wasn't being mean. I wasn't picking on them. There's a reason you're scored the way you are. And we, as retirees from the system, we're able to kind of share that information and knowledge. I'll put the plug in. Bruce hasn't talked about it yet. He usually puts a plug in. Bruce and I have actually published 2 books so far.
Oh yeah, the books.
Our Understanding Federal Time Credits came out last summer in June, July, and we just in January released a new book, Understanding Prison Designation and Custody Classification. And it's really, both of them are born out of our passion for educating people and educating attorneys. Have any attorneys online? Bless their hearts.
It's the Green Book.
There's been more than one time where I was standing mainline, that's what we call being at the noon meal, and having someone come up and ask me questions, and they go, but my attorney said, and I have to explain to them, well, your attorney's not a case manager. I get that, but let me explain to you the policy. We went through the designation manual, we broke it down, we talked about the PSR and how important it was. Facebook page this afternoon, right before we went on, I was answering some questions about EED status. If the probation officer doesn't say it's verified, then it's not. And those are some of the things that we talk about. So again,
all right, we got a minute. Yeah, less than a minute. Yes. So we'll get to it next time. Awesome. Thanks for coming out today. Now, pretty soon we're going to be on Apple Podcast and Amazon Audible and all that stuff. But right now you can download these shows for free on the LA Talk Radio site. You can download the MP4, the MP3, whatever, or you can just view it from the viewing player on the LA Talk Radio site. Well, folks, it's been such a pleasure. We're looking forward to taking this journey with you on our fantastic show, Federal Prison Authority Presents Around the Block. And Susan, go ahead and say goodbye. Or
it's great. I hope y'all join us. I was thinking we're at 50
it's 50 minutes. No,
it's 50. See, I'm new at this. Bruce is the pro at the podcast.
Yeah,
but please
33
join
seconds.
us, and we'll see you soon.
Next time. All right, we'll see you next time on the show, everybody. Take care. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye.
You're listening to Federal Prison Authority Presents Around the Block with Bruce Cameron and Susan Giddings, only on LA Talk Radio.